By mid-March, the Chinese Communist Party had repeatedly sent large groups of military aircraft and warships could escalate into real combat. Taiwan began discussing how to quickly mobilize. However, transitioning from drills to actual combat would not be an easy task for the CCP. The mobilization of its Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, and ground troops would require a complex process, and there are clear signs distinguishing drills from a real combat. One key indicator to determine whether the CCP intends to attack Taiwan is the movement of its landing fleet. On February 26, a landing fleet from the CCP's Eastern Theater Command arrived about 40 nautical miles off the coast of Kaohsiung and Pingtung for long-range training. It claimed it was for shooting drills. However, Taiwan's military detected no live-fire exercises, and no amphibious vehicles were seen leaving the landing ships. On March 17th, Taiwanese warships monitored the CCP's 052D destroyer, Guilin, the 054A class frigates Wenzhou and Jingzhou, and the 056A class frigate Tai'an, but no landing ships were observed. The February 26th exercise was barely a credible intimidation drill, and the February 17th actions could only be considered harassment. The CCP's landing ships are stationed in Shanghai, which holds about one-half of the CCP's landing ships. If an assault on Taipei were planned, the ships would likely need to gather in Fujian Province's Ningde area, as the distance from Shanghai is too far. The other half of the CCP's landing ships is stationed in Zhanjiang, Guangdong. If the CCP planned an attack on Taiwan, the landing ships in the Southern Theater Command would all head north, some joining those from the Eastern Theater Command. These movements would pass through the Taiwan Strait or bypass Taiwan via the Bashi Channel, making them undetectable. Some ships might be stationed in Shantou, Guangdong, preparing to feign an attack on Taiwan southwest. If these landing ships were to mobilize on a large scale, it would signal a potential CCP invasion of Taiwan. Otherwise, the CCP would be unable to launch an assault on the island. Another sign to watch is whether large warships are deployed in significant numbers. The CCP's Eastern Theater Command Navy has 9 052D destroyers, 4 052C destroyers, and 4 modern-class destroyers stationed in Zhoushan, Zhejiang, far from Taiwan. If the CCP were preparing to attack, some of the 052D destroyers might gather in Ningde, Fujian, to escort the landing fleet. The older 052C and modern-class destroyers would likely be sent to the northern and eastern seas around Taiwan to act as decoys, drawing airstrike fire from the U.S. military and its allies, while also trying to rush toward U.S. fleets to conduct kamikaze missile attacks. However, the early mobilization of landing ships and destroyers could not escape the notice of Taiwan's defenses on the Matsu Islands. The CCP's Northern Theater Command Navy has the Liaoning aircraft carrier, 4 055 destroyers, 9 052D destroyers, and 2 each of the 051 and 052 destroyers. If the CCP were preparing for an attack, half of the Northern Theater's destroyers might be deployed to escort the Liaoning aircraft carrier as it moves from the Miyako Strait into the Philippine Sea. The CCP could sacrifice the Liaoning and its escorts to delay a U.S. carrier strike group, while retaining half of the destroyers to defend the Yellow Sea and East China Sea. The Southern Theater Command Navy has the Shandong aircraft carrier, 4 055 destroyers, 10 052D destroyers, and 2 each of the 052C, 052B, and 051B destroyers. If the CCP were preparing to attack Taiwan, some destroyers would likely be deployed early to escort the Shandong aircraft carrier through the Bashi Channel into the Philippine Sea, while others would head to Shantou to participate in a feigned attack on Taiwan southwest. The CCP might also sacrifice the Shandong and its escorts to hold back another U.S. carrier strike group, but it would need to retain at least half of its destroyers to defend the South China Sea, possibly leaving the Shandong in the region as well. If war broke out, the U.S. military would likely attack the CCP's military islands in the South China Sea immediately. The large-scale deployment of these warships would be easily detected. To maintain fleet operations, the CCP would also need to dispatch a significant number of supply ships, which would be large and easy to track. The 054A and 056A frigates, as well as older destroyers, would be used like military speedboats in attempts to carry out kamikaze attacks on U.S. fleets or draw Taiwan's anti-ship missile fire. In total, the CCP would need to mobilize up to 40 destroyers, 50 frigates, at least 1 aircraft carrier, and at least 6 large supply ships. The CCP's submarines, which are closely monitored by the US and its allies, would also be difficult to hide if deployed in large numbers. Without such a massive fleet mobilization, the CCP would be unable to execute an invasion of Taiwan, but preparing such an operation would take time and it could not be completed in the short term. From 6 a.m. on March 17th to 6 a.m. on March 18th, Taiwan detected 59 Chinese military aircraft, including 43 that crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, entering northern, central, southwestern, and eastern airspace. This group included fighter jets, bombers, early warning aircraft, and drones. The largest batch occurred directly over the Taiwan Strait, with a total of 34 aircraft, including 25 that crossed the median line. From 6 a.m. on March 21st to 6 a.m. on March 22nd, Taiwan detected 47 Chinese aircraft, 41 of which crossed the median line into northern, southwestern, and eastern airspace. Again, the largest batch occurred over the Taiwan Strait, with 29 aircraft, including 23 that crossed the median line. This suggests that the CCP's exercises remain politically motivated. If the CCP were genuinely preparing to invade Taiwan, the majority of its fighter jets would be deployed in Taiwan's northern airspace to escort the landing fleet. The next priority would be Taiwan's southern region, to control the Bashi Channel and escort bombers past the first island chain to potentially attack U.S. fleets or Taiwan's eastern region. The CCP would likely deploy fewer fighter jets directly over the Taiwan Strait, fearing that Taiwan's air defense missiles could shoot them down. During actual combat, the CCP would be cautious about crossing the median line. The Eastern Theater Command is forming 4 J-20 brigades, stationed in Wuhu, Anhui, Huzhou, Zhejiang, Quzhou, Zhejiang, and Wuyishan, Fujian. 2 of these are relatively close to Taiwan, while the other 2 are farther away. The Eastern Theater Command is also forming 4 J-16 brigades, stationed in Rugao, Jiangsu, Chengming, Shanghai, Hangzhou, Zhejiang, and Nanchang, Jiangxi, all of which are farther from Taiwan. If these aircraft were to assemble along the Fujian coastline, or if J-20s and J-16s from the Southern Theater Command were to gather near Shantou, it could signal that the CCP is preparing to invade Taiwan. Taiwan's Leishan radar has a detection range of at least 2,500 to 3,000 kilometers, enough to track large numbers of Chinese aircraft. The J-20s of the Northern Theater Command are tasked with defending the Yellow Sea, Bohai Sea, and Beijing, and would not be mobilized. They may only deploy a portion of their J-16s to support the Eastern Theater Command. The Western Theater Command has fewer J-20s and J-16s, while the Central Theater Command has just established 1 J-20 brigade, but no J-16s. If the CCP were preparing to invade Taiwan, H-6 bombers would need to be relocated in large numbers from airports in Hunan, Anhui, Shanxi, Henan, and Jiangsu to coastal airports, which would also be detected by Taiwan's radar. The mobilization of these aircraft would not happen with a simple order. First, the airports in the Eastern Theater Command's coastal regions must have sufficient capacity and be properly prepared in advance. Second, the ground crew and equipment would also need to be relocated on a large scale to provide timely support. Third, a large supply of air-launched weapons, ammunition, fuel, engines, and parts would need to be in place ahead of time. Fourth, the frontline command structure would need to be reorganized to enable the operation. During political exercises, pilots might only fly across the Taiwan Strait median line and return, often without carrying weapons, but actual combat would be very different. If the CCP were preparing to invade Taiwan, it would need to mobilize hundreds of thousands of ground troops and equipment, which would take more time to complete. If not deployed in advance, the exercises would be unable to turn into actual combat. The gathering of the CCP's landing ships and requisitioned roll-on roll-off ships would signal the concentration of amphibious forces. The Marine Corps from the Southern and Northern Theater Commands would first need to gather in the Eastern Theater, totaling 6 brigades. The 72nd and 73rd Group Armies from the Eastern Theater and the 74th Group Army from the Southern Theater each have 2 amphibious combined brigades. These 6 brigades of Marines and amphibious brigades would need to assemble in 1 or 2 locations. However, for them to be fully in place, under unified command, and ready for action, it would take at least several weeks, and such movements would be hard to conceal along the coast. If the CCP intended to seize Taiwan, it would need to requisition about 500,000 ground troops, moving additional group armies from other theaters, which would take even longer and be more easily detected. The preparation of the CCP's rocket force would also not be completed overnight. The process of fueling, testing, loading, assembling, and moving hundreds of missiles to launch sites, as well as identifying targets, would be detected by U.S. satellites. The preparation for an invasion of Taiwan is a lengthy and complex process that is hard to cover up, and the CCP has never conducted similar exercises before. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, they held an exercise in November 2021, gathering 90,000 troops along the Russia-Ukraine border. However, the US and NATO nations issued early warnings, and Russian forces eventually withdrew. In January 2022, Russian forces once again gathered along the border, and the U.S. issued another early warning. By January 24th, the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine was ordered to evacuate, and 1 month later, the war broke out. If the CCP were to mobilize large forces along the Fujian coastline, it would be detectable by the U.S. and its allies, and Taiwan's intelligence would also be swift. The CCP could face great difficulty in transitioning from military exercises to real combat without being detected. However, the CCP could potentially plan smaller-scale, localized offensives, such as attacks on Kinmen or Matsu Islands. An attack on Kinmen or Matsu by the CCP would likely have a higher chance of success, but it would still trigger a war in the Taiwan Strait, with the U.S. and its allies likely intervening, possibly with sanctions or even an embargo. The CCP would gain little and risk significant losses. The cost of such an attack would be much higher than expected, potentially exposing all of the CCP's vulnerabilities, much like the Russian military did in its real combat operations. Recently, the CCP released images of a new generation of amphibious assault vehicles, claiming that their overall performance has been improved. These vehicles are set to replace the older 05 series amphibious armored vehicles. However, they admitted that the previous models had slow speed, insufficient firepower, weak informational capabilities, low versatility, and lacked features like panoramic view devices for vehicle commanders, automatic loaders, and advanced fire control systems. According to these statements, the CCP's amphibious forces urgently need an equipment upgrade, and launching a war with the current equipment could be difficult. If the CCP insists on invading Taiwan, the difficulty would be comparable to scaling a mountain. Taiwan's terrain is extremely rugged, with numerous peaks above 3,000 meters. If Taiwan's military retreats to the mountains and establishes defenses behind natural barriers, the CCP's offensive would be severely hindered, and its forces would be slowly worn down. The Taiwan Strait is also a formidable natural barrier, with the narrowest section being 130 kilometers wide and the widest 260 kilometers. The conditions are tough, with strong winds and waves making it easy for landing ships to capsize even a small mistake. Losing a few ships would be a mild loss in such conditions. In this environment, soldiers would be reluctant to board ships, and maintaining the stability of a large-scale landing would be even harder. Urban warfare would be a nightmare, with dense skyscrapers in Taipei, Taichung, and Tainan. If President Lai Ching-te were to station 92,000 to 130,000 soldiers in the cities, along with 1,200 tanks, street battles would be inevitable. If urban warfare begins, civilians would be caught in the crossfire. International condemnation would be overwhelming, and domestic support for the CCP could waver. Looking at the battlefield in Ukraine, we can see that Ukrainian forces have caused significant losses to the Russian military, and key cities have yet to be fully captured. If the CCP attempts this strategy in Taiwan, the result would likely be no better. Taiwan's Air Force, although 35,000 strong, has 289 F-16 and Mirage 2000 fighter jets that would be enough to challenge air superiority. While defending the island might be difficult, dragging the CCP into a quagmire is their forte. Taiwan's navy, with 38,000 personnel and 117 ships, though smaller in scale, is sufficient to disrupt the landing process in the strait. On the other hand, the CCP's 40 destroyers and 2 aircraft carriers, though impressive on the surface, would likely become cannon fodder in actual combat, unable to sustain high-intensity amphibious operations required. The loss of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea serves as a cautionary tale. The CCP's navy might not be able to escape unscathed. Why can't the CCP go to war with Taiwan? The elders have already done the math. To destroy Taiwan, the cost of rebuilding would be trillions. But where would the money come from? Local government debt is already overwhelming, and if foreign capital leaves, internal chaos would erupt immediately. The wealth of high-ranking families overseas has been seized by the West. Who would risk their fortunes and lives? When Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. froze $300 billion of its assets. The CCP has even more money. And if war breaks out, Trump has access to big data and would freeze everything without negotiation. The CCP elite couldn't sit still. In mid-March, they rushed to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump, hoping for a half-hour talk to ask him to draw a red line. They fear that if Xi Jinping attacks Taiwan, their overseas assets would be wiped out. But Trump warned that if the CCP uses military force on Taiwan, the consequences would be unimaginable. Assets in the West would be frozen. In response, CCP elites told Trump, China is a two-party political system. Xi Jinping doesn't have the final say. Zheng Qinghong and the elders don't want war. Please support us and help stop him from inside and outside. So who is truly in power within the CCP? Zheng Qinghong and Zhang Youxia. These older figures now hold considerable influence. Before July last year, Xi Jinping had full control in Beijing, but during the third plenary session, he allegedly suffered a stroke from the stress and almost didn't survive. After being treated in a Beijing hospital, senior officials and the elders urged him to push through despite his condition, fearing that if he fell, no one would clean up the mess. After recovering, he tried to consolidate power and viewed military action against Taiwan as a sacred mission. Currently, Zheng Qinghong is stationed in Beijing, working with the Central Military Commission Vice Chairman Zhang Youxia to stabilize the situation while keeping a close watch on Xi to prevent him from causing chaos before stepping down. The public and insiders in the CCP's headquarters see that he will likely be unable to make decisions by the end of this year or next, with his exit almost certain by 2027. International instability is also overwhelming the CCP. How could they afford to start a war? In April, the U.S. faces a peak in Treasury debt repayments, and the CCP holds $1 trillion in U.S. debt, waiting to sell it off and short the dollar. The financial war has already made them frantic. Europe is the CCP's largest trading partner, with annual foreign trade revenue of $890 billion. It can't afford to lose that. But if Trump joins forces with Russia to deal with Europe, that lucrative market will be lost. If Russia freezes its White Swan intercontinental missile silos in exchange for the U.S. lifting sanctions, Putin will have more room to focus on Europe, and the CCP can only secretly support Ukraine, while their state media propagates Ukraine's justice in resisting Russia to win Europe's favor. This would safeguard their economic interests while preventing Europe from supporting U.S. military actions in the First Island chain. The Middle East is another headache for the CCP. It's the hub of oil and finance, and they must stabilize it or the RMB will drop. Recently, the CCP persuaded Iran to increase its oil payments in RMB from 28% to 40 to 50%. But the U.S. is closely watching, and Trump wrote a letter to Iran's supreme leader, warning that if nuclear development doesn't stop in 2 months, war will follow. If Iran collapses, all oil would go to the U.S., and RMB transactions would be in danger. The CCP sent a 055 destroyer near the Strait of Hormuz under the guise of a security bond exercise, secretly providing satellite data and missile intelligence to Iran, while trying to intercept U.S. missiles. But they didn't dare to engage directly, because once U.S. sanctions hit, all the overseas assets of the CCP elite and high-ranking officials would be seized. Both domestic and high-level opposition would erupt, leading to Xi's immediate downfall. Who in these wealthy families wants war? With the global situation in disarray, there's no way the big powers can engage in war. The CCP can only continue to intimidate, but real combat is off the table for now.